A much-loved couple, Liz and John Calvert, owners of a yachting resort, living the good life.
It was 360 degrees of blood in that bathroom.
Where are the Calverts? And what does this crime scene have to do with them?
There was 300.
On March 11, 2008, firefighters forced open a bathroom door and found 360 degrees of blood. 8 days earlier, Elizabeth and John Calvert had walked into their accountant's office to confront him about missing money. They never came home. Their bodies have never been found. And the man who might have explained what happened was already dead. But this story begins weeks earlier, with a number that shouldn't exist. The number on the screen was wrong, not by much, just $847.32. But Liz Calvert had never let an unexplained discrepancy slide in her life. She was a tax attorney from Savannah, meticulous by training, transitioning to manage Harbour Town Yacht Basin full-time. This one refused to balance. It was late 2007, early December, and she'd taken over the marina's books from Dennis Gerwing's accounting firm just weeks earlier. The office was quiet, water lapping against the docks beyond the windows. A bill paid twice in October, a deposit that didn't match the invoice. Small things. Explainable things. She'd asked Dennis about it over the phone. He'd been apologetic, efficient. A vendor error, he'd said. He'd look into it. But then there was another, a transfer that didn't align, another duplicate payment. Each time she called, Dennis had an answer. Always reasonable, always plausible. John Calvert, her husband, an engineer and boating enthusiast who'd built Harbour Town into the laid-back marina he'd always envisioned, told her not to worry. Dennis has been handling the books for years, he said, his voice warm with easy trust. I'm sure there's an explanation. Liz stared at the screen. There's always an explanation, she murmured. That's the problem. Keep that detail in mind, not the amount, the pattern. By January 2008, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Liz sat in the marina office on a cold evening, tracing the trail. Every discrepancy. And there were more now. A dozen she'd found, tied back to accounts Dennis Gerwing had managed. Always small enough to miss individually. A few hundred here, 1,000 there, but together they formed something deliberate. Her training kicked in. Tax attorneys don't chase accidents, they follow methodology. Carelessness is random. This wasn't random. The spreadsheet told a story, if you knew how to read it. Payments redirected, deposits vanishing into transfers with vague descriptions. The kind of careful, incremental theft that only showed up when someone who understood money looked closely. How long had Dennis been doing this before she took over the books? She didn't have proof yet, not the kind that would hold up anywhere official. But her instinct, honed by years of finding what people hid in columns of numbers, screamed that something was deliberately wrong. Liz closed the laptop and looked at John. I need to talk to Dennis, she said, calm and certain. Not over the phone, in person. John frowned. You think he made a mistake? She met his eyes. I think he'll tell me it's a computer glitch. The words hung between them. John didn't understand yet, didn't see what she saw. Dennis Gerwing was his friend, his trusted partner. But Liz Calvert was a tax attorney, trained to follow money trails until they led somewhere they shouldn't. By the first week of February, she had enough questions to demand a meeting. She didn't know it yet, but asking those questions would cost her everything. Sunday afternoon, March 2nd. Liz Calvert walked into Dennis Gerwing's office at Seapine Centre, carrying a folder she'd spent 6 weeks compiling. Dennis Gerwing was 54 years old, a well-liked figure in Hilton Head's business community who projected calm competence like a second skin. He'd managed Harbour Town's finances for years, and John trusted him completely. Liz sat across the desk and opened the folder. Spreadsheets, printouts, highlighted discrepancies. She'd organised everything chronologically, cross-referenced every questionable transaction. Professional, methodical. "I found some inconsistencies I need you to help me understand," she said. Dennis leaned forward slightly. "Let me take a look." She walked him through it. The bill paid twice in October. The deposit that didn't match the invoice, the transfers with no documentation attached. Small amounts, but patterns. Patterns meant something. She kept her voice calm, giving him room to explain. She expected confusion, maybe defensiveness, the natural response when someone points out mistakes. Instead, Dennis barely glanced at the spreadsheets. His answer came too quickly. "I got it figured out," he said, smooth and easy. "It's like a computer glitch. No worries." A computer glitch. The same excuse she'd predicted to John weeks earlier. Liz held his gaze. "A computer glitch." "Yeah," Dennis smiled, reassuring, like he was calming a client who'd gotten worked up over nothing. "These systems, you know how they are. I've been tracking it down." It was the ease of his answer that bothered her most. Like he'd been expecting the question all along. She started to press further. But Dennis was already shifting gears. "Look, this is important stuff, financial details. Why don't you bring John back tomorrow and we'll just talk about it at that time?" There it was, the deflection. Not "let me show you the error logs," not "here's the documentation explaining each transaction," just "bring John tomorrow." Turn this into a meeting Dennis could control, with John there as a buffer, as someone who'd believe a long-time friend over his wife's suspicions. Liz hesitated. Every instinct she'd honed as a tax attorney screamed that this was wrong. You don't dismiss 6 weeks of documented discrepancies with "computer glitch, no worries." You don't refuse to explain yourself to the person asking legitimate questions about their own money. But what could she say? Accuse him outright? Demand answers? He clearly wasn't going to give. "All right," she said finally. "Tomorrow. With John." Dennis nodded, still projecting that calm competence. Liz gathered her spreadsheets and walked out. The drive back gave her time to think. Dennis hadn't looked surprised, hadn't looked worried. He'd looked prepared, like a man who'd been waiting for this conversation and knew how to steer it away. Computer glitch, no worries. Tax attorneys don't believe in coincidences, and embezzlers don't call themselves thieves. The next afternoon, Liz would drive back to Seapine Centre for a second meeting. This time, John would be there too. By Monday evening, neither of them would be coming home. Monday afternoon felt like any other. Liz's phone rang while she drove. John checked his watch at the marina, and neither of them knew they had hours left. Sunday's meeting had left questions unanswered. But Monday was a new day, and life moved forward. Liz drove south from Savannah toward Hilton Head. John wrapped up paperwork at Harbour Town. A 6 o'clock meeting to clear up some bookkeeping questions, routine business. Around 5. Liz's phone rang. Terry McClure, her friend, answered, expecting nothing more than the usual catch-up call. They talked easily, the kind of conversation friends have when they're not really worried about anything. The topic turned to the evening's meeting with Dennis. "Terry, Sensing Liz's mild unease about confronting a long-time business associate, tried to lighten the mood. "You're going to do this in public, aren't you?" Liz laughed. "Oh, yeah, there's no reason to be concerned." The words came easily. Why would there be? Dennis was John's friend, his business partner for years. Whatever the discrepancies were, they'd get sorted out. Probably exactly what Dennis said, some computer thing. John would be there. They'd talk it through like adults. "It shouldn't take long," Liz said. "Just some questions about the accounts." Terry said something reassuring. They made vague plans to catch up later in the week. The call ended the way 1,000 calls between friends end, casually, with the assumption that tomorrow would come and they'd talk again. Keep that phrase in mind. No reason to be concerned. Back at Harbourtown Yacht Basin, John Calvert checked his watch. 4:30. Nancy Kappelman, the harbour master who'd worked alongside the Calverts every day and knew their routines down to the minute, was finishing up in the office. John stopped by. Routine check-in, marina business. "I'll be back later tonight," he told her, casual and certain. "Let's catch up tomorrow morning." Nancy nodded. "Sounds good. See you Tuesday." "It's just a quick meeting with Dennis," John said. "Shouldn't take long." A meeting about bookkeeping. About discrepancies Liz had found. Nothing dramatic.
The former accountant, told Liz, I got it figured out. It's like a computer glitch. No worries.
Just the kind of conversation business partners have when the numbers don't quite line up. Neither Terry nor Nancy heard anything wrong in those voices. No fear, no goodbye, just the easy rhythm of friends who'd talk again tomorrow. But they wouldn't. By 5:30, both Liz and John were on their way to Seapine Centre. Liz driving north from Savannah, John driving south from Harbourtown. Converging on Dennis Gerwing's office for a meeting he'd said would clear everything up. Terry McClure didn't know it yet. Nancy Kappelman didn't know it yet. Those two ordinary phone calls, Liz joking about doing it in public.
I was like, you're going to do this in public, aren't you? And she's like, oh, yeah, there's no reason to be concerned.
John confirming Tuesday morning plans were the last conversations anyone would ever have with Elizabeth and John Calvert. The meeting was scheduled for 6 o'clock. By 6:15, both of them would be gone. At 6 o'clock sharp, John Calvert sat across from Dennis Gerwing in the same office where Liz had heard the computer glitch excuse 2 days earlier. He'd arrived on time. Dennis made small talk while they waited, marina business, the weather, nothing that mattered. The kind of conversation two men have when they're filling silence until the real discussion can begin. Liz was running late, 15 minutes late, according to the clock on Dennis's wall, when she finally walked in around 6:15. She apologized briefly, traffic from Savannah, the usual delays, and took the chair next to John. 3 people in an office. A spreadsheet's worth of questions waiting to be asked. Weeks of preparation. A folder full of highlighted discrepancies. 2.1 million reasons to demand answers. The meeting should have taken an hour, maybe 2, if things got heated. It lasted less than 15 minutes. According to what Dennis Gerwing would later tell investigators, the discussion barely began. Whatever was said in that office, whatever the 3 of them talked about or didn't talk about, never got to the point of discussing the issues at hand, never touched the financial questions. Liz had driven from Savannah to ask. They never got to the point of discussing the issues at hand, Dennis would later say. Instead, something else happened. Something that made Liz stand up abruptly. Before 6:30, before a single line on her spreadsheet had been addressed. "John, come on, we got to go." Why would Liz drive from Savannah to confront an embezzler, then leave without asking a single question on her spreadsheet. John looked confused. But he stood, followed his wife to the door. Dennis watched them leave together. Keep that detail. Together. They walked out of Seapine Centre sometime around 6:30. The parking lot was quiet. Evening settling over Hilton Head. 2 cars sat in the lot, where there had been 3 when the meeting started. John's silver Mercedes, Liz's Mini Cooper, Dennis's vehicle. John and Liz got into the Mercedes, not Liz's car, John's, and they left. The Mini Cooper stayed exactly where Liz had parked it when she arrived 15 minutes late, keys presumably still in her purse, her car abandoned in the parking lot of the man she'd come to confront. Does that sound like a woman who'd finished her business and decided to carpool home? Dennis Gerwing would later tell police he left his office around 6:40, 10 minutes after Liz and John walked out. By then, John's silver Mercedes was already gone from the parking lot. But Liz's Mini Cooper sat exactly where she'd parked it. No one would see either of them alive again. 10 minutes after Liz and John walked out, Dennis Gerwing was still sitting in his office, alone, with a story he'd later tell police that would unravel one receipt at a time. At 7:15 p.m. that Monday evening, Dennis walked into a CVS pharmacy on Hilton Head Island. Surveillance cameras captured him moving through the aisles, selecting a package, paying at the register. He told police later he'd gone to buy Band-Aids. A cut on his hand, he said, from a broken wine bottle. The CVS receipt confirmed the timestamp. 7:15. 1 box of Band-Aids. What the receipt didn't show, but the surveillance footage did, was what happened next. Dennis walked out to the parking lot. Then he turned around, walked back inside, and bought latex gloves. 2 trips into the same CVS in the space of 5 minutes. Band-Aids first, latex gloves second. An investigator would later review the footage and note the detail Dennis left out of his story. He went in, bought Band-Aids, went back out to the parking lot, came back in and bought latex gloves. Why would an accountant with a cut hand need latex gloves at 7:30 on a Monday night? The gloves were never found. Not in his office, not in his car, not in any trash can investigators would later search. Dennis bought them. The receipt proved it. The surveillance footage showed it. And then the gloves vanished, used somewhere, disposed of somewhere, gone. Keep that detail. The gloves were never found. Around 7:30 p.m. Monday night, Dennis Gerwing's cell phone went dark. Not dead battery, not poor signal, dark. Powered off or deactivated, the kind of silence that means someone doesn't want their location tracked. The phone wouldn't turn back on until 11:15 a.m. Tuesday morning, almost 16 hours, a blackout that stretched through the entire night. Liz and John Calvert disappeared. An investigator would later ask the obvious question, why did he power off his cell phone? Did he know we would use GPS to track his whereabouts? Surveillance cameras at the Seapine Centre office complex captured fragments of those dark hours. Late evening, early morning. Dennis Gerwing pacing back and forth outside the building, alone in the empty parking lot, moving through the frame again and again, restless in the dark, while his phone stayed silent. What was he doing during those 16 hours? Where did he go when the cameras couldn't see him? What happened in the gaps between those surveillance clips? The phone knew, but the phone was off. While Dennis Gerwing's phone stayed dark through Monday night and into Tuesday morning, Terry McClure and Nancy Kappelman went to bed thinking nothing was wrong. Just ordinary phone calls with friends who'd talk again tomorrow. By Tuesday morning, someone would finally notice that something was very, very wrong. Tuesday morning. The lights inside the Harbour Town office were still turned off. That's when Nancy Kappelman's unease began. She'd arrived to open for the day, as usual. Instead, darkness. The office should have been lit already. John and Liz were always early, always prepared. Nancy unlocked the door and stepped inside. John's briefcase sat on the desk. She'd never seen it there overnight before. Next to it, a file statements. Liz had mentioned they'd pick up Monday evening after their meeting with Dennis. The file hadn't moved. Small things, explainable things. Except Nancy knew the Calverts. They didn't leave business undone. They didn't leave briefcases behind. At 10 o'clock, Nancy started calling. First, Liz's phone. It rang, went to voicemail. "Hey, it's Nancy. Let me know when to expect you." She called John's number. Same thing, voicemail. She waited, checked the docs, asked other staff if they'd seen the Calverts. No one had. Noon came and went. No call back, no text, nothing. Nancy called again, left another message. "Just checking in. Call when you can." The phones kept ringing into silence. By early afternoon, the unease Nancy had felt that morning was hardening into something worse. This wasn't like them. The Calverts were responsible, reliable, the kind of people you could always count on. John's briefcase didn't stay behind. Liz's to-do lists didn't stay unfinished. And their phones didn't go unanswered for hours. Nancy had worked with them long enough to know something was very wrong. At 3:30 p.m., she made a decision. John had scheduled a 4 o'clock meeting, important marina business. The kind of meeting he'd confirmed yesterday before heading to see Dennis Gerwing. Nancy cancelled it. John would never miss that meeting. Never. She sent a marina employee to check the Calvert's yacht, the Honey Rider, docked at Harbour Town, where Liz and John had been planning to live full-time. The employee returned a short while later with news that made everything worse. Nobody's there, just the cat. PC, the Calvert's cat, was on the yacht, alone, waiting to be fed. No sign that anyone had been back since Monday morning. Keep that image. A cat waiting for owners who never came home. Nancy stood in the office, staring at John's briefcase, and felt what she'd been trying not to believe settling into certainty. Liz and John Calvert hadn't come home Monday night. "I knew that I had to do something," Nancy would later recall. "I had to figure something out." She called Liz's law firm in Savannah, trying to track down contact information for David White, Liz's brother. She didn't want to alarm anyone yet, but she needed to know if someone, somewhere, had heard from them, because roughly 24 hours had passed since anyone had, and with every unanswered call, the silence was starting to feel less like an oversight and more like a
There was a possibility from the beginning that John and Elizabeth Calvert decided they were going to leave town and not let anybody know.
Where did Dennis take them after that Monday meeting? What happened in those 16 hours when his phone went dark? Where are their bodies? Did he act alone? The questions multiply rather than diminish. "Missing doesn't give you the same grief as gone," David said. "It's different. It doesn't end." Grief for the dead follows a path, however winding. Grief for the missing circles back on itself. There's no funeral, no burial, no moment when you say goodbye. There's just the continuous present tense of absence. "You learn to carry it," he said quietly. "You don't move on. You just keep moving. The water still laps at the docks. The boats still come and go. And somewhere the Calverts remain. Not in their marina, not in their home, just gone. The waiting never ended. That night, aboard the Honey Rider, a cat named PC waited for his owners to come home. The yacht rocked gently at its slip, and PC settled into the routine of evening alone. The same routine Liz and John Calvert had left him in dozens of times when they'd gone to dinner, gone to meetings, gone to handle business. But this time, they didn't come back. Not that night, not the next morning, not ever. PC waited. Days passed. The cat stayed aboard, expecting footsteps on the dock, keys in the lock, voices calling his name. The waiting that began March 1st, 2008, would stretch years. Eventually someone took PC in, gave him a new home, but the waiting never truly ended. It transferred to others. David White at the marina, Nancy Kappelman by the phone, investigators searching for evidence. A community waiting for closure that doesn't exist without bodies. The last confirmed sighting of Elizabeth and John Calvert was Saturday evening, March 1st, 2008, leaving Dennis Gerwing's office at the Sea Pine Centre. They'd gone there to confront him about money that had vanished from their accounts. $200,000 stolen over years through small, careful transactions. Liz had discovered it. The discrepancy that started with $847.32 and unravelled into systematic embezzlement. She'd gone to Dennis's office that Saturday to hear his explanation. John had come with her. What happened after they walked out of that office? That's the question no evidence can answer. The timeline goes dark. 15 minutes in his office, then they left. John's Mercedes vanished into the Hilton Head night. Definition made his CVS run an hour later. Band-aids, then back for latex gloves. His phone went silent for 16 hours. Searches found nothing. The drop cloths he'd purchased disappeared. The bench seat from his Yukon disappeared. Whatever happened in those hours between their confrontation and Monday morning when their absence became undeniable, it's gone. Scrubbed clean, hidden away, taken to a grave Dennis himself would occupy 3 days after they were reported missing. Investigators know the what embezzlement. They know the when, sometime between Saturday evening and Monday morning. They know the who Dennis Gerwing, whose violent suicide spoke louder than any confession. But the where and the how remain permanently out of reach. No bodies, no crime scene, no physical evidence connecting Dennis to whatever violence ended their lives. The case file is thick with motive and thin with proof. The truth died with Dennis on March 11th, 2008, and somewhere in woods, in water, in a location only he knew. Elizabeth and John Calvert remain missing. He called it a computer glitch, but the one person who wouldn't believe him, the tax attorney who understood money, who would demand documentation, who wouldn't accept convenient excuses, was the one person he couldn't let leave that meeting alive. And so Elizabeth and John Calvert disappeared into the question that has no answer. Elizabeth and John Calvert remain missing. Their story didn't end with answers. It ended with absence, with questions that will never close, with a truth buried alongside the man who took it to his grave. What stays with us isn't just the tragedy of what happened, but what it represents. Liz was meticulous, detail-oriented. The kind of person who noticed when $847.32 didn't add up. That small discrepancy unraveled years of deception. But it also cost her everything. Sometimes the act of demanding accountability, of refusing to accept convenient excuses, puts you in the path of someone who cannot afford to let you walk away. The Calverts trusted Dennis Gerwing with their finances for years. That trust became their
Of course, he left out the fact that he went in, bought some Band-Aids, went back out to the parking lot, came back in and bought some latex gloves.
For families living with unsolved disappearances, there is no closure. There is no funeral, no burial, no moment when grief finds its resting place. David White still runs Harbourtown Yacht Basin, still signs the checks Liz should have signed, still carries the weight of a question that has no answer. The marina endures as her legacy, not because she chose it, but because she was stolen from it.
There was 360 degrees of blood in that bathroom.
If this story moved you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Your comments, your reflections, your questions. Keep these conversations alive. Every share, every comment helps ensure that stories like the Calverts don't disappear into silence. Thank you for listening. This story is based on a real unsolved case, with some scenes dramatized for clarity and narrative coherence. Out of respect for the Calvert family and all those still searching for answers, the heart of what happened remains unchanged. Elizabeth and John Calvert deserve to be remembered, not just for how they disappeared, but for the lives they lived before that final meeting.